South Australia's coronavirus cluster in Adelaide's northern suburbs still stands at 20 cases, so it has not grown exponentially over the last 48 hours, which is heartening, but health authorities are warning more cases are likely. Reporter Matthew Smith joins us now from Adelaide. Matt, g'day. So there have been frustrations about the testing process there?
Most definitely, Joe. 11,000 people have been tested over the last 2 days. Good numbers for South Australia and Adelaide, but there have been people queuing for hours, and that's made things very difficult. Many of those who've queued haven't been able to get in, told to come back the following day. The numbers so far, we have 20, possibly 21 cases, one case to be confirmed overnight. 14 suspected cases. Now, the Premier's just been on local radio this morning saying there will be a small increase in numbers today. There is a media conference happening in about 2 hours' time, so we'll know more there. But authorities trying to crack down on this outbreak which happened in the hotel behind me. It's a Medi hotel by the name of Peppers. A cleaner picked it up from the surface and the outbreak just went from there. But SA Health trying to jump onto this situation quickly, and their work has been praised by the acting Prime Minister, Michael McCormack.
Well, I spoke to Premier Stephen Marshall yesterday, and 20 cases in South Australia. There are going to be these outbreaks. There are going to be these pockets of virus outbreaks. I think Premier Berejiklian in New South Wales did very well by keeping the borders open to South Australia, but warning New South Wales residents that to reconsider perhaps their travel arrangements to South Australia. But these things are going to happen. The public health response by South Australia has been very, very good and very, very robust.
And Matthew, yesterday the state government there in South Australia announced some restrictions in light of this cluster that turned up in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. Is it likely that there will be further restrictions now placed on the people of South Australia?
He has flagged that, yes, there may be some more restrictions announced at that media conference just before 11 o'clock local time. And Joe, important to note, we've just found out that testing will be extended. Victoria Park, one of the main sites in the middle of the city, will now be open until midnight tonight. And they're also trying to put resources into other testing sites, wanting to get as many people through as possible and to cut those queues down, especially, as you said, the weather here is heading to 34, so people lining up for hours, not an ideal situation.
Yeah. And Matthew, just a couple of other issues, because we're going to have a chat to the AMA rep for South Australia a little later this hour, so I'm just keen on getting a few more details. What's the discussion been there in Adelaide around this testing of staff who are working at these quarantine hotels? And also whether the staff were working between hotels, because that was an issue that was raised with what happened in Victoria with the outbreak from quarantine hotels.
Well, the Chief Public Health Officer did say that there had been staff working between two of these Medi hotels as they're part of the same group. Not sure if that will continue. Obviously, they're going to be changing things here, and one of those things is making testing mandatory. It hasn't been up until now, and that Chief Health Public Officer, Nicola Spurrier, said that Adelaide's way they were going about the Medi hotels had got the gold class rating nationally. So they were saying they were following all the proper processes up until now, but obviously some things will need to be changed.
And Matt, just finally, how would you describe the mood there in South Australia now, considering that this hasn't exploded in a way that health authorities would be deeply concerned about? I mean, when you look at it, there were the 17 cases, I think 2 days or so ago now, and then kind of 4 more cases yesterday. So what's the mood there in terms of if it appears authorities are doing a pretty good job on getting on top of this pretty quickly?
There's probably a general air of uneasiness. Unfortunately, people have now been raiding supermarkets, so the typical things that are now getting out of stock, like toilet rolls, is happening again, just like during the first wave. The advice for people is changing on a daily basis. Now there is a strong recommendation for people to wear masks when they're out in public, especially on public transport. The vulnerable groups, the elderly, the chronically ill, are now being told, don't go out of your homes if you can possibly manage it. Get someone else to go to the supermarket for you. It's, as I said, an air of uneasiness, but people still trying to go about their normal business, although that's hard in the sectors which have now been shut down. Gyms are closed as one example. Others like restaurants and cafes severely restricted. So it's a lot different to a week ago.
Yeah. Okay, Matt Smith reporting there in Adelaide. And just before we move on from that, I might just mention some copy that's come up on ABC Radio there in South Australia just in the last half hour or so, which gives you an indication of the continuing concern there. And this is, like they mentioned, a couple of different places that people have to be careful of. And one is, for example, new advice been issued for anyone who's been to a pizza bar in Woodville between the 6th and the 16th of November. So that's 10 days. And that includes anyone who got takeaway, including delivery. Get tested even if you don't have symptoms. Now, it's really, really important, even if it was just very briefly that you walked in and picked up a pizza. So, yeah, based on that, you can see that there is concern for what could happen as a result of this outbreak in South Australia. And the fact that that covers 10 days for that one particular spot would indicate the potential for more growth there, but hopefully they'll keep on top of it. So we're talking to the AMA in South Australia in about 20 minutes' time, and also the South Australian Premier due to step up for a media conference around 10:30, I think, this morning. That's Adelaide time, so 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. We'll be across that story through the day here on the ABC News channel. New South Wales residents are being advised to delay non-essential travel to South Australia because of that COVID-19 outbreak. Reporter Alexia Atwood joins us now from Sydney. Alexia, good morning. So what's the latest health advice?
Morning, Joe. Well, yes, Gladys Berejiklian has just fronted the media a very short time ago, and she's now saying that if you can avoid travel to South Australia, it's advised non-essential travel. You should delay that travel. If you do have commitments, the border is still open, but yes, you should delay non-essential travel. And anyone who's coming in from South Australia, they'll still have to get screened at airports and at bus terminals if they're arriving in Sydney, at Broken Hill, and they'll be asked if they've been at any of those venues of concern in Adelaide as well, and they'll be asked to very carefully monitor for symptoms. But Gladys Berejiklian, she has reiterated this open border policy. She is saying that we can't just shut the borders every time that there's an outbreak, that we do need to get used to the new normal, and we need to be able to adapt and have faith in our own contact tracing abilities and those of the contact tracing abilities of other states and territories. But yeah, she has put out this new advice because obviously the situation has been changing over the last 4 days since we first learnt about this outbreak. So let's hear from the Premier, Gladys Berejiklian.
We are confident that South Australia has it under control, but we're just saying to our community, yes, the borders are completely open, but if you can delay it for a few days, unless you have to go there, please do so. But of course, essential travel is still allowed and the borders are completely open.
And Alexia, the Premier sounding a little bit croaky there.
Yes, Joe, that's right. The Premier did struggle with her voice through that press conference because she has revealed that she did have to have a COVID-19 test. It did come back negative. She lightheartedly asked at that press conference that perhaps the journalists, direct their questions to other members of her team. But yeah, she said that she was one of 17,000 people that did get tested in New South Wales in the last reporting period, and essentially there's no locally acquired cases of coronavirus in New South Wales. So that means that the state has gone 11 consecutive days with no new cases.
Almost as good as Victoria. Okay, Alexia Atwood reporting there from Sydney. Dr Chris Moy is the president of the South Australian branch of the AMA, and he joins us now from Adelaide. Chris Moy, welcome. So how are you feeling about the spread of this outbreak so far in the north of Adelaide? There hasn't been an explosion in cases, at least in the last 48 hours. So is that giving you some optimism about how fast officials are getting on top of this?
Oh, look, there's still definitely a sense of trepidation, but there is confidence that the kitchen sink has been thrown at this. and that first up, a lot of the lessons that were learned in Victoria have been taken on board, and that's to go really, really hard with the contact tracing and also put up the restrictions early and to try and get ahead of this as much as possible. And also, one must be said that there's been a willingness for South Australia to take on help from all the other states with the contact tracing, and also help from the federal government with the Defence Force, the ADF, to help with contact tracing, because it's realised that the idea is to try and get that contact tracing out and get in front of it so that we can actually encircle this thing. And there is some relative confidence that that is the case at the moment, although there's still worries about leakages.
Yeah. Now, what about the fact that it escaped from hotel quarantine in the first place? Should we be able to have hotel quarantine setups in Australia where that just does not happen, or should we expect that is going to just happen from time to time?
Look, I think, the South Australian system was just recently assessed in a review by Jane Holton as being top-notch, and in fact the system was actually put out to Tasmania to teach them how to do it. I think the bottom line is we're dealing with an incredibly infectious disease, and Australia faces a threat. The main threat for this condition comes from people returning from overseas, and it's got to be a balancing act of the ability to manage large numbers coming here and maintaining that high level of security. And being able to hold the line to minimise that chance of it happening.
Are you comfortable with these quarantine hotels being multi-storey buildings in CBDs, or should they be quite separate, like the Howard Springs camp in Darwin, where it's kind of a little out of a CBD and you can ring fence it to a degree?
Well, look, I mean, we've heard various sort of solutions, and again, the reviews just happened at the federal level. But, people have come up with ideas of even doing it at Christmas Island, and I'm sure that wouldn't be very good from a mental health point of view for a lot of people. Look, it's a balancing act. So far, it's actually done pretty well, apart from in Victoria initially. And look, this is a one leakage, but it shows how infectious it can be. I think we just have to do the very, very best we can and have the very, very high standards, and also maintain that vigilance throughout the community that it can leak out, and then we contain it as quickly as possible if it does.
And so you are comfortable with these quarantine hotels continuing to be multi-storey buildings in CBDs?
Look, it may be better to find some other option, but at this stage, it's going to be logistically extremely difficult not to do it at these hotels at the moment, mainly because of rooms. I've been aware that there are significant resourcing issues of finding this many rooms and being able to get the resourcing and the staffing to the right people, to the right places to be able to maintain this level of activity.
Right. How do you feel about the testing protocols or lack of at these quarantine hotels? What was the situation with staff, like cleaning staff and security personnel who are working at these quarantine hotels, and what should that testing protocol be?
Well, I think the recognition is that they do need to be tested on a regular basis. How frequently is another thing. My understanding is it was just about due to happen, and then this has occurred. Having said that, it's borderline whether it would necessarily have made a great deal of difference, because the time lag in this is very, very close in terms of whether it might have been picked up anyway. And again, it gets down to the fact that from a whole community point of view, we've got to be vigilant as well, because even a few days is a few generations of spread in this virus. So yes, we definitely do need to be maintaining the testing of the staff in facilities, and I think that needs to happen. That's a lesson. But I think also we still got to maintain the vigilance, because may not be aware that if we get on top of this, a lot will be due to some degree of luck because of the conscientiousness of a particular doctor who insisted that a patient with minimal symptoms have a test. And really, to some degree, that may make the difference and may mean that we've caught it earlier and hasn't got to the sort of the Victorian level where it was going on for weeks.
Oh, can you tell us more about that?
Well, my understanding is that the individual concerned had relatively minimal symptoms, or it wasn't clear that it was a COVID situation, and that there was a reluctance to have a test, but the doctor noticed some symptoms and came back and insisted that the individual have a test. So really, I won't be religious, but by the grace of God that this happened, that the doctor actually followed through and actually stayed stayed committed to that vigilance in a community we hasn't seen any cases for months. And then that has actually closed this down. So really, there has been some luck involved. And this gets back to the AMA's position that, we can do as much as we can on hotel quarantine and do all the testing every week on the staff. But we do need this incredible vigilance out in the community and amongst particularly medical practitioners for these cases. And patients need to stick with the main thing. If they've got any symptoms, they don't go to work, they don't go to school, they do not go out, and they get tested. And we as a community need to hold to that really high level of vigilance and not fall into complacency.
Yeah, Chris, I don't know if you can go into this detail, but as you understand it, would that have been the first case that was detected in South Australia? As I understand, that was kind of like the woman in her 80s who was the mother of the cleaner.
So my understanding is that that's what happened. So it was only that has actually caught it initially, and has allowed us to really get on top of it quite quickly, and hopefully, as it looks like now, hopefully catch it at a relatively low, in terms of the branching tree and the of this virus, that we've caught it very early at the stage where we can control it and contain it to a spot fire instead of turning into a bushfire as it did in Victoria. So, look, that the AMA has been saying that we've got to be, for the whole community, we've got to really not get complacent, and really the medical system needs to be vigilant, but the community need to do their part as well and actually get with the program. That is, if you've got symptoms, get a test and don't be reluctant to have it. It could be you that causes the next outbreak.
And what about the issue of the same staff at a quarantine hotel working at multiple hotels? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that is a problem, and I think that's very similar to the problem in aged care facilities, and that has to be looked at. I think there has been some level of control about this, although one of the things has been, in fact, just the level of staffing. It's actually been quite hard, and behind the scenes I'm aware that it's actually quite difficult to get enough staff, even enough security guards who are managed by the police in our facilities, just to get enough staff to be able to maintain this. It's a major logistical problem, hotel quarantine. It requires a great number of resources.
But if the costs of getting this wrong are so great, as we saw in Victoria, surely there should be massive efforts at ensuring that the hotel quarantine setups are effective.
Oh, I think there has to be, and I think there already has been. But then the balancing act then is the more resources you put in there, then the less people you can actually bring back from overseas. And that is I think that's a really tricky balancing act. And I know that, there's enormous pressure to bring back as many people as possible, which I totally understand. But it's also a balancing act to be able to maintain the safety of every facility to the absolute highest level. You may not be aware that the thought is in this case here, that the spread was probably from a contaminated surface. And that really scares us to a degree, because most of the spread we've been looking at has really been more aerosol, droplet spread through the air. That this one was a contaminated potential surface that's actually led to this, which puts us to another level of concern about how infectious this condition could be.
And can you tell us any more about that? What the surface was and where was it?
No, look, I haven't got the specifics,
right.
But the thought is that hasn't gone through the air this time, and it may have been possibly through the cleaning processes that the cleaners picked it up on a surface. Look, there has been sort of ideas about this from a scientific point of view, that the virus can stay on a surface for 28 days. But we haven't seen a lot. There was thought that maybe the situation in New Zealand, the outbreak that came out of nowhere, could possibly have been caused by that. But, the fact that, we've been focusing so much on masks and other things, that, a surface that could be even transferred out of the room and somebody else, even if they're wearing protection, accidentally touches it and puts it on their face and the virus is off, just gives you an idea how infectious this condition is. It really is a problem.
And Chris, just before I let you go, you mentioned that there'd been a really good response from people in the community to go and get tested. Thousands and thousands of people over the last couple of days. There has been an issue, though, that there are so many people that they're being turned away, that these places have had to turn some people away, have been lining up for hours and hours. What do you think about the fact that that has happened, considering that we've had all this time to prepare for an outbreak like this and the facilities haven't been able to handle that demand?
Well, I totally understand the frustration of the people who've come out, and I've got to say thank you to all of them because they've really heeded the message to get tested and they've been incredibly patient. I think the reality is, and Casey might give you an idea, that really there's been a ramp up in the order of about 4 times the amount of testing within 48 hours. And so that's really been very difficult to manage. They are really throwing everything at it at this moment in time, but it's a matter of not just people but resources as well. And look, so far it's been done as well as I think can be. I think it's been acknowledged, but it's just, how do you have so many people ready to suddenly do this testing in such a short period of time? So look, ideally we do even better, and maybe more lessons will be learnt. But I have to say, overall, you can't be too critical about the amount of effort because I've seen what's been going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Okay, Chris Moy, thanks so much for talking to us from Adelaide this morning.
It's a pleasure.